Thanks for staying with us. The SA Human Rights Commission has flagged concerns over migrant children or children of refugees facing discrimination in South Africa. Now, this despite laws put in place to protect these children. The Commission says these children are being denied their rights. And this week, the SAHRC hosted a workshop in partnership with the European Union and the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund, that's UNICEF, to address these issues. For more on this now, we're joined now virtually from here in Johannesburg by Omolara Asuni. She's the research advisor for child rights at the SAHRC. Omolara, thank you so much for your time this evening. I mean, we talk about, almost flippantly about, yeah, but there are legal instruments. There are these acts that's supposed to take care of these things. We've got the Convention on the Rights of the Children, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa in 1996, and the Children's Act of 2005, all set up to protect the rights of children, and that's in terms of Section 29, Part 2 of the Refugees Act. Detention of a child must be used only as a measure of last resort and for the shortest period possible. It's all there in black and white. Why then do we have to have a workshop to discuss alternatives to detention and care policies for children on the move? That in itself is an indictment, isn't it?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm not sure if it's an indictment because I know that we do have laws and we have progressive laws. But the problem we have is the implementation of these laws to this full extent. And most of the time, I think what we find is that government departments do their best, but because they work in silos, they are not able to actually provide the pockets of service that these vulnerable children need. And there's a need to have this conversation, and they need to ensure that government departments are actually working together to achieve their rights. So that was the essence of the workshop. It was not supposed to be an indictment, but more supposed to be an enlightenment and to also help us to chart the way. We already have the intention, which is our constitution, which is the convention, just to ensure that these intentions are actually carried through.
Talk to us about some of the stories that you're hearing, some of the experiences that are being shared with you, with how some of these so-called children on the move are being treated and what they are experiencing at their most vulnerable time when they cross the borders into a country like South Africa.
So some of the big issue has always been documentation, most especially when they're refugees and they're on the run, they don't have documentation with them. And when they come to the country to seek asylum, it takes about so many years for it to actually materialize. Sometimes adjudication can take as long as 10 years, after which the government department can then decide that they're not entitled to that particular asylum, which then makes it difficult for the children to find their way forward. And also when they don't have refugees permit on time, they're not able to get access to services like social services, like healthcare services that they actually truly need. So that's on one side. On the other side, which was what the convention was also focused on, was on detention. And according to the law, according to even we visiting Lindela, there's always this policy that children would not be detained. But in practice, we've seen children that are being detained just to get their parents to come to the police station so that they can be arrested for illegal migration.
So they're using them as bait.
Yes, and that was actually a big thing that happened in 2020, and lawyers for human rights were the one that handled that particular matter, and it was actually not something we were excited to hear about because the children were held for about 10 hours in conditions that was not conducive for children.
That one example in itself just sounds so traumatic, the impact of which on those children, even if it was for a period of 10 hours, that is enough to leave a lasting impact on a child. Have you and your partners in this sphere engaged with the government departments on these kinds of issues or on these particular cases in itself as well?
Yes, so that was the reason for the workshop, was to be able to discuss with government departments. And I'm happy to announce that we had a Department of Social Development on board. Dr. Mabe came and he actually presented and told us of different structures and different policies that were in place to ensure the rights of children on the move. The Department of Home Affairs unfortunately could not attend, and they tendered their apology the day before the workshop. But we've been working with them regarding this issue. We've been, not recently, but in the past, we've always visited Lindela to find out what are children in the in the detention center or not. Most times they are not, but what we then do is that out there ensure. So the problem with children being in the Lindela time is when the child is about 17, 16, and they cannot tell by looking at the child that that's the child's age. But then what the department has done is to ensure that they engage with the Department of Health to, once the child says he or she's a child, they go to the Department of Health to actually analyze if that child is actually is a child or not. So that's the process that we've taken with them, and they've actually been on watching it. Well, recently, I think the children we have in Indela now is actually children that are actually being forced there by their parents. Those were refugees that decided that they were not happy being in South Africa because of xenophobia. They would like to go to another country, but UNHCR had intimated them that there's no way they can actually just take them from South Africa to another country. They either have to be repatriated or find their way to another country. So they camped in front of UNHCR's offices for so long, but now they're now in Lindela, and Lindela can't just throw them out. So, but they're not being detained in the real actual sense of being detained, but the children, they are also not receiving the care they need because of what their parents are putting them through. So I think this was one of the things that we also would like to iron out with the Department of Home Affairs, which we've been talking to them about, but we need to bring to fore again and ensure that we find a way forward, because it looks like we don't see how we can move away from here because the parents are standoffish and insisting that they're going to be there.
Yeah. What is the some of the reasoning that you're hearing coming back from government when you discuss these issues with them? For instance, again, I go back to the example of these children being held in detention for 10 hours as bait to try and get their parents to come to the police station so that they can be arrested. Following the law is one thing, so one can point that out. One would want to know why these government officials are not following the rule of law in black and white, but also how can they be so inhumane? Because surely your first reaction to how you treat a child, no matter where that child comes from in the world, is to be humane, because a child is one of your most vulnerable members of any society, whether that child comes from another society and has now entered yours looking for safety. The mind boggles that somebody would think that a child can be used in that way. What kind of feedback are you getting from officials or from government departments saying why their officials have been doing these things on the ground?
So what you said is actually important, because children are children no matter where they come from, and that's clearly resonated throughout the workshop, where even the department, the government department, the Department of Basic Education actually came out to say clearly that children are children, irregardless of their migration status, and they should be treated with that particular care. What we've heard from government departments is that most times the people on the ground don't necessarily understand what illegal migration is all about, what refugees about, what how they should treat children. So hence why that happens. So one of the problems is that we probably tend to speak to the head of department, and then the information doesn't flow down to the ground. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Commission is also has been engaging with South African police services to teach them how to do things in a human and human rights way. We've been trying to do workshops with them, but these things take some time.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Very important discussion that I'm sure and I hope we will continue to have. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That's Omolara Asuni, the research advisor for the child rights at SA Human Rights Commission.